But to have the experience that you had as a filmmaker, it's unfortunately a feeling and a sentiment that a lot of filmmakers have had. So in that sense, welcome to show business. But yeah.
This is a stream discussion involving artist Robert Longo, actor Keanu Reeves, and author William Gibson. And they're talking about a cyberpunk film that they battled to make more than 25 years ago. And they failed. What started out as an ambitious, creative idea ended up a bland, clumsy mess. And it really wasn't their fault. They were undermined by the very studio that funded them, hobbled by enforced casting that they didn't need, and bloated by a budget far larger than they ever wanted. And the result was a box office bomb that failed to achieve and has been ignored, or forgotten, or just plain ridiculed over the years. Is it a good film? Yes and no. Do the creators feel proud of what the studio released to cinemas? No, not really. Yet, as the original sits quietly on Amazon Prime, ironically looking like a knockoff of The Matrix, the flashes of creativity that the team managed to preserve make this film worthy of a watch. Ideas it hinted at back then have become societal issues in today's world. And then there's the tale of its star, who, years later, became the literal poster boy for this genre in not one but two iconic portrayals in two very different franchises. And yet despite all this, and the film gaining a cult status, the original movie was seemingly doomed to be forgotten, gathering virtual dust, layers of pixel static. But this conversation, released in 2022, wasn't to talk about a film that failed. It's to talk about a measure of justice that the film finally received, that allowed its director to provide a more interesting vision of what might have been. Yes, his original take on the film was never shown, but now there's a better way to see what it was trying to be. This is a film that inspired The Matrix, a film based in a fictional world getting a huge Apple TV adaptation next year, and a film that stars version 0.5 of arguably Hollywood's most beloved action hero.
You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking. All right. So I got to finish this. So tell me.
So while their story wasn't a success, and the film was far from a classic, it's worth a showcase. And since this story of a film's sorry collapse at the hands of its very own supporters is far more fantastical than the butchered mess that the studio left its creators with, well, this is going to be a good one. It's also going to be a long one, so strap yourselves in,
hit me,
get that gum shield ready, because yes, in 2020 Keanu Reeves played Johnny Silverhands, and yes, in 1999 Keanu Reeves played Neo, but in 1995 Keanu Reeves was Johnny Mnemonic. Johnny Mnemonic is an action film, based on a short story by renowned sci-fi author William Gibson. It tells the story of an information courier, and his struggle to survive following a job gone horribly wrong. A betrayal leaves him dangerously overloaded with priceless data and on the run. Literally headhunted by corporations and Yakuza, he picks up an unlikely ally in the form of a bodyguard for hire, but has to deal with a deadly bounty hunter who, fueled by bionics and religious zealotry, wants to claim the reward for Johnny's head. This was a film based on the hot topic of the moment. It had a lead that had just achieved huge Hollywood success. Sprinkle in a bad guy, riding high in Hollywood, and a strong, diverse international cast.
Not on the head!
And what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot really. But let's reset the virtual stage here, as context is everything. And let's go through the film's background, its troubled production, nightmare of a shoot, what survived, what's worth viewing, and its recent redemption. And we'll start with the surprisingly old genre of cyberpunk. Cyberpunk imagines a future where we're no longer comforted or saved by new technology, but we're challenged, ground down, or even addicted to elements of it. The same flaws and sins we have today, just with the next generation of interface. A future where corporations hold all the power and little morality, while your average Joe fights the all too basic issues of just surviving. These are dark takes on our future, yes, but they also provide a rich environment for allegory, alongside humour, horror, drama, crime, and even romance. Now, while sci-fi has been a popular topic for writers for a very, very long time, as the optimism of the 50s and 60s soured, these types of darker worlds, these darker futures, became not only easier to conceive and recreate, they sadly became much, much easier to believe. The genre had many precursors, especially within the new wave sci-fi authors of the late 60s and 70s, who could create these worlds in print while Hollywood struggled with basic effects and computer games were crude bundles of pixels playing tennis. But by the early 80s, those other media were catching up. Cinema in the early 80s gave us Escape from New York, Videodrome, Burst City, and of course Blade Runner, itself based off a new wave sci-fi story. Elsewhere, it was common at the time to see packs of kids gathered in video arcades, hypnotised by light and sound as they battled machine opponents. And comic fans were entranced by issues of Judge Dredd or Akira. While the more adventurous would be playing Paranoia, one of the many tabletop role-playing games that were allowing fans to really live their characters out. And yet, with all this exposure, it was still the printed word that provided both the name and the lightning rod for the movement. In 1983, Bruce Bethke first coined the term cyberpunk for a short story. And just a year later, author William Gibson published the first book in his Sprawl series, Neuromancer, winning acclaim, awards, huge sales, and quickly became the face of cyberpunk. It also popularized the use of a phrase, cyberspace, to depict the online virtual world. Now, that word was first used in a previous short story by Gibson, and, seeing the demand for his work skyrocket, his publishers took the logical step of compiling all of his short stories into one book, Burning Chrome, that was quickly snapped up by fans, and the first story of which was the reprinted 1980 tale of Johnny Mnemonic.
And it also reminded me that when we started, like when you first got in touch with me, when we started, we were talking about making this little art film. So I was able to start that screenplay and pretty much go through it as though I wasn't doing a Hollywood film. It's like I wasn't worried about commercial concerns.
Johnny's journey to the screen began when Gibson crossed paths with Robert Longo in 1989. An artist who'd achieved mainstream and critical success in the 80s before moving into music videos, Longo was fascinated by the possibilities of Gibson's sprawl, and together they planned a small black and white adaptation of Johnny as an art house project, with a limited budget of about $1.5 million. The small budget was restrictive, yes, but it afforded them a measure of control over the project, as Gibson's previous experience with the messy Alien 3 production had not been pleasant. First pitched through Carol Co., the home of Terminator 2, and then through two independent producers, the project initially faced a problem with its scale. You see, low budget was translating to potential backers as low expectations for profit, and so Longo and Gibson realised that they had to ask for more money, far more money, and not because they wanted or needed it, but because it made the project look more important, and therefore more interesting to backers. Even though the increased cost made Longo's lack of studio film experience more of an issue. While this tactic at least helped them catch a little more attention, they also found help from a most unexpected source. One of their film's core areas, core subjects, core characters, was about to capture the world's attention.
Well, Allison should know.
What
do you
is
say to that,
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
On your mark, get set. We're riding on the internet, cyberspace, set free. Hello, virtual reality.
Interactive appetite, searching for a website, a window to the world, got to get online.
Take a spin, now you're in with a techno set. You're going surfing on the internet.
You don't need a phone line to operate internet?
No.
The early 1990s had seen the spread of the internet hit a critical point in the eyes of both business and home users, and suddenly everyone, from large corporations to the host of daytime breakfast programs, were trying to understand the impact, dangers, and potential profits that such a network could bring. The internet was suddenly everywhere, and more adults were wary of it than wished to admit. Hollywood naturally capitalized on this, and following 1992's breakout hit Lawn Mower Man, the following years would see a steady increase in films featuring the internet, as a plot point, or even as an enemy in itself. 1995 alone would see a slew of movies portraying the evils of online technology, from Hackers to Virtuosity, The Net, and Strange Days. Buoyed by this current relevance, the film secured finance due to a conglomerate of 19 international backers, and Sony's TriStar Pictures, who became the movie's US distributor. In terms of casting, Val Kilmer was initially cast to play Johnny, but dropped out last minute when he was offered Batman Forever. While frustrating, Kilmer had already proved difficult to work with, and so there was a sense of relief when the previously considered Keanu Reeves, at the time still known primarily as an indie actor, jumped on board to play Johnny instead. Keanu held respect for the works of both the author and the director, starting a friendship with both that remains to this day. He'd also just finished a small action film for Fox that the studio had limited hopes for, so he was eager for the change in tone. The finalising of backers and the casting of Reeves were both positive outcomes, but as we moved through the production and the film shoot, both events would have unintended negative consequences for the project, starting with the rest of the cast list. While Longo had his international backing in place, those same parties began demanding casting hires that reflected their countries. So Longo cast accordingly, with Udo Kier to satisfy German backers and Takashi beat Kitano for the Japanese contingent. Both are highly respected actors. Udo had worked with Keanu before on My Own Private Idaho, and the production was even gifted additional funds by the Japanese backers to shoot extra scenes of Takashi, purely for the Japanese cut of the film. This is why some people, to this day, incorrectly believe the longer Japanese cut to be a director's cut, which could not be further from the truth. The director has never had a say in the cut of this movie. Musicians Henry Rollins and Ice-T were both cast for their popularity, rather than any acting experience. And while both were criticised for elements of their performance, both used the film to develop decent careers, and both still speak warmly of working with Longo. Comparatively, the casting of Dina Meyer as Jane was almost straightforward. A bodyguard for hire, suffering from a nerve condition, her character was purposefully removed from her short story equivalent, Molly Millions. Now this wasn't just due to the fact that Molly was essentially the focus of the short story, but also because Molly features in Neuromancer, and Gibson wanted to avoid rights issues if that was made into a movie at a different studio.
Jesus, Jane.
The casting of Dolph Lundgren was far more disruptive, as Sony and the Swedish backers did this without Longo's permission. They assumed the actor would be a stellar international draw for the movie, and so they hired him, despite all the other roles in the script already being cast. Gibson was left in the bizarre situation where he had to come up with a brand new character and simply wedge it into the story, increasing the fractured nature of what Sony was already amending. Compounding the issue, Lundgren was tempted onto the project with the promise that this would be his time to shine as a dramatic actor, and so Gibson was left to write grand monologues for him, putting further strain on the narrative balance. It wasn't just cast choices that were taken out of Longo's hands, however. While Keanu's casting had been welcome, the backers realised that the combination of his Canadian nationality, along with writer Gibson's, meant the production could apply to shoot in Canada and benefit from tax incentives there. However, those incentives also required a minimum percentage of Canadians in key crew roles, and so Longo promptly lost his planned cinematographer, Michael Chapman. Michael had shot the likes of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull for Scorsese, and so you can only imagine the level of visual flair he would have brought to a project such as Johnny. Instead, Longo was forced to pick Francois Protan, the best Canadian option available, whose biggest claim to fame at the time was shooting Weekend at Bernie's.
A classic.
He was also one of the many crew hires that would go on to undermine Longo's authority on set. Meanwhile, Sony was demanding multiple script rewrites, pressurizing Gibson, and even at one point requested the film's title be changed, as they didn't like the word mnemonic. Longo later noted they also had issues pronouncing it. So all in all, the production lurched into its shoot in a fragile state. But you can still imagine a scenario where the film could succeed. The cast and crew bravely putting the drama behind them to craft something visually and creatively challenging. However, the subsequent success and failure of two very different films combined to fire up Sony in the very worst way and effectively doom the production.